If you don't know, we also have a LinkedIn group page. If you want, you can join, and we usually post information about the events coming up. But also you can use it as a forum if you want to ask questions. We keep an eye on it. And when we got a YouTube channel where we post the recordings of all of the sessions that we've had. Before we start, I'd like to thank the sponsor, which is McDonald's, for tonight. They kindly provide the food and the drinks, both here and in Wellington. And then I'm going to introduce the speakers. So today we have Matt Walsh from ADG joining us. Matt has over 27 years of experience in architecture and engineering, with a passion for utilizing new technology to minimize waste and implementing lean construction principles. He completed his postgraduate studies in building information modeling and integrated design in 2013. Matt is also a regular speaker at BILT and Autodesk University conferences, sharing his expertise in these fields. His commitment to utilizing technology to drive efficiency and sustainability has been a driving force behind ADG's digital transformation journey. And he's going to talk to us about Bimbeats. So Bimbeats has been crucial in ADG's Engineers' digital transformation journey, providing valuable insights into operational processes and enabling a comprehensive digital strategy for improved efficiency and productivity. It measures the success of digital initiatives and supports employee development for long-term growth and success. With the help of data and analytics, ADG engineers have developed a digital strategy that aligns with the business goals and enhances operational efficiency. So during this presentation, Matt will share some of the key findings and insights that ADG engineers have gained through the use of Bimbeats. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Matt.
Thanks very much for that introduction, Monica. Let me just find my presentation and I'll share my screen. You guys can hear me okay?
Yeah, we can.
Excellent. All right. Now, are you seeing my full screen? And
yes.
Excellent. All right. This is in a little bit of a different format from what I'm used to, but we'll see how we go. Hopefully, as long as you see everything your end, if there's any problems, just shout out. So I guess the topic of conversation today used to be when I gave these presentations around Bimbeats, and there's no surprise that I used to work for Bimbeats and worked very, very closely with ADG engineers in implementing Bimbeats within their organization, to the point where they employed me as their chief digital officer. So I often talk about we as Bimbeats and ADG, so apologies for that. I haven't fully transitioned over into the CDO role yet, but it does go to show the collaboration that we had as Bimbeats, the software company, and ADG, one of our customers, and how we worked closely together to align their business goals with the tool itself. And I think some of the lessons learned that we've gained over the last 3 years is what I want to share with you guys now. And it's around capturing your data, understanding what to do with that data and relating it back to an ROI, so that there's a clear business reason for why we're using these tools and getting the insights from these tools. And we do have the benefit of having 2 Bimbeats clients on the other side where you guys are. So Monica and Jake and Anton are all using Bimbeats. So when the presentation's over, if you don't believe anything that I'm saying, you can obviously quiz those guys and they'll give you the truth rather than just my slides. The other confession is I was pulling this presentation together literally 5 minutes ago, which does have its advantages in that you'll see almost live data from Bimbeats being pulled into the presentation this afternoon, and just to show how quickly it is to capture real-time data across your entire organization. So what are the challenges we're facing, or some of the bigger ones? So these challenges aren't unique to ADG at all. Fees are getting tighter. We need to reduce the duplication of effort across all our projects and identify opportunities to scale pockets of innovation. Staff wellbeing and retention, again, not unique to ADG at all. We need to retain good people. We want to attract good people to the business. And when we have good people within the business, we want to make sure that that knowledge that they have is captured and shared across all of our people, not just kept within the heads of individuals. A boring but very useful part of what Bimbeats is about managing our IT cap and OPEX spend. So what are you purchasing from a hardware and software perspective? Is it performing as you're expecting it to, and are you getting the value from your hardware? So we'll get into the details of this a little bit later, but this extends beyond just your BIM tools. This is across your full suite of applications within your organization. And then the big one that's particularly relevant to architectural practices and engineering practices, and that is Revit productivity. It's definitely no secret that Revit is a bit of a beast. It's particularly slow, and if you don't follow best practice, there's significant detrimental effects by not doing so. So who are Bimbeats? If you haven't heard of Bimbeats, you probably have heard of the guy in the middle. So the guy in the middle, Conrad Sobin, is the co-founder of Bimbeats alongside Adam Sheether, but Conrad also is responsible for the Archilab package within Dynamo. And I'm sure if you guys use Dynamo, you will use the Archilab package, and that's now been downloaded by over 500,000 people. So it's a pretty good, useful productivity tool that Conrad has developed and given away for free. And then alongside Conrad is Adam Sheether. So Adam is based in Brisbane with me, and he is the CEO of Bimbeats and also Automation. So Automation is the company that I worked at prior to coming to ADG, where we focus on software development for the AEC industry, and all of the team there have experience of being engineers, being architects, and knowing how to develop software for the use case and the business case within the AEC space. And then myself, I kind of alluded to this already, I'm now the Chief Digital Officer within ADG, but prior to that, I was with Bimbeats and Automation, and prior to that, I'd spent some time at BBN Architects, but I'd spent 20 years of my career as a structural engineer with Arup. And during that time, my focus was always on digital technology. How do we reduce inefficiency, improve workflows, improve collaboration with our stakeholders? So it was kind of inevitable that I would move into a technology role and less so an engineer. So what are the features or some of the key features of Bimbeats that kind of make it unique from some of the other offerings? It does capture model metrics, which are incredibly important, but beyond the model metrics, some of the biggest benefits are around the user activity and understanding competencies of the users and identifying opportunities to train users to gain additional skill sets. Identify, like I say, those pockets of innovation, who are doing the cool, innovative things with the new tools. How do we get that out of the heads of individuals and scale it across the entire business? All of the data that we capture is in real time. There is no delay, there is no lag, there is no exporting files, there's no creating Excel spreadsheets that then feed into Power BI. This is all live data that's posted into a web application, and it's fully scalable across every project and every user across your entire organization. Our largest client is 2,000 Revit users in America, and they run that continuously across every single one of their projects. So scalability is not an issue with the solution that we've got with Bimbeats. The tools that we do capture, so the pipeline of data is across all of these tools. I'll focus heavily on Revit in this presentation because that is the tool that we generally spend most of our time in and where most of the productivity gains are that we want to get. But we do cover all of these tools. So it's not just about Revit, and the computational design tools, it extends far beyond that. In terms of the technology that Bimbeats uses, it uses something called the Elastic Stack, which isn't particularly familiar to the AEC industry, but it's very widely used beyond the AEC industry. And I'll show you in a second some of the companies that use it more broadly. But essentially, we install an add-in within Revit, which collects the data, and then we process that data where it gets sent directly to Elastic, which is the web database, or it goes to something called Logstash, which aggregates that data before sending it to Elastic, which is the web database. And Logstash essentially aggregates the journal files or the CAD logs. So anything that is a log that's collected by your software That is sent to Logstash, it's processed in Logstash and then sent to Elastic in a file format and schema that we can interrogate that is consistent across all of the software. And then the visualization engine is called Kibana, and that is very, very similar to Power BI. And for those who are familiar with Power BI and not familiar with Kibana, we can do a call into our Elastic database and pull that data down so it can be read within Power BI. And we do that with a lot of our clients, and we did that at ADG to start with because people were familiar with Power BI and they were not familiar with Kibana. The downside to Power BI is that it doesn't retrieve millions of records within seconds like Kibana does. You have to be very selective about what you're pulling into Power BI, whereas Kibana is across all of the entire organization's data and can retrieve it extremely quickly. So these are the companies that use the Elastic Stack, and they use it very differently to us. They're using it really to process servers and get data out of servers and reduce the amount of downtime on servers, whereas we're using it slightly differently. And when we showed Elastic how we were using Bimbeats, they'd never seen anyone process log files to understand user behavior and competency profiles. The main use for this is processing logs from servers. So in the last 3 years, we've learned quite a few lessons around data capture and improved the product and obviously improved the return that we're getting on the use of the product. And what we've realized is that capturing the data is only a very small component of the whole process. So it's really about capturing the data, analyzing that data, taking action on it, reviewing it, is it still doing what it's supposed to do, and then feeding that back into a continuous loop. So we're always refining and continuously improving the process. So the way that we've split up the dashboards is under these 3 topics of projects, people, and productivity. And I'll run you through each of these in detail. So it's about taking the company on a journey of understanding, now we've captured all this data, how do we prioritize what's important to the business around those 3 topics of projects, people, and productivity. So what you're seeing here is what you would see if you logged into the Kibana interface within the web portal, and then you're navigating your way around between projects, people, and productivity. So the way that we would typically start, if we're looking at across the entire organization, is that we would start with projects and we'd move from the left-hand side across to the right-hand side. So on the left-hand side, we look at the priority projects. We drill down into a deep dive within those projects. We understand how those projects have been performing over time, and then we drill down into some other features. So if we start by looking at priority projects, what we're looking at here, and unfortunately I've had to blur all of this detail because it is related to projects and people, but essentially on the left-hand side here, we have the total time it's taken to open and sync by project. So immediately, you know, within your organization, the projects that are taking or, you know, have the most activity, and that's broken down into open and sync time by project name. If you then said you wanted to drill down more into this top project, you would click on this project, and then all of this data would update to show all of the files that are on that particular project, the maximum file size, and the maximum amount of warnings in each of those files. So it's a starting point to understand which projects are most active, which files within those projects are most active, and then picking probably the 2 most important metrics around file size and warnings. From there, we then navigate to the key metrics dashboard. So we've now drilled down into you can come directly into here and look across all of your projects. And this will be your file name and then the key metrics about that file. And we've color coded this with a traffic light threshold that is completely customizable into the things that are important around improving the performance of those files. And then at the top, probably the top 4 actions that you would need to take action on to improve your worst performing files. So if we look at that from a user experience point of view, we click on the priority projects and we navigate to that dashboard. We select that top project and say, now I just want to filter by that top project. And then we navigate into the key metrics by any file related to that project. So it goes from the priority projects, understanding which ones have got the most activity with the most the biggest file size and warnings, and then drilling down into the priority metrics of each of those files. So once we got to that point, we can start looking at, well, what do we want to do about that? Like, we've identified the worst performing projects, but what does that mean and what can we do about it? So if we look at one of the key statistics that we have on that screen, we can navigate to the Compact on Sync page, and this will indicate how many times the file has been synced without a compact and how many times it's been synced with a compact by user. So you can find out and identify a BIM manager on a project to make sure that that BIM manager is responsible for compacting that central file. Or, as a couple of organizations that we work with have done, is they've set up a remote machine that opens each file every week and runs an automatic compact on every file. So you don't have to have this as a manual operation. But what we can see here is across all of the projects, the benefit of reduce or hitting compact on sync across all of your projects. And I think that's around 8%. So we'll get into this later on in the presentation, but we have quantified what difference it makes for opening and syncing a file as the file gets smaller. So we can quantify the benefits of performing this best practice. So here is the compact on sync across all projects, but if you wanted to drill down into a particular project, you can do so by identifying who's working on that project, who are the two people that have compacted that file, and what the effect of that compact was on that particular file. And if you want to know any more about that, Conrad has written a blog post around exactly how much time and money that costs by not compacting your central files on a regular basis. Okay. We can then move across and look at the views audit checklist. So now we're drilling down into a particular project that we're interested in, and we can see what percentage of the views on that project have the view clipped, how many views have been placed on a sheet that don't have a template, how many have analytical categories hidden, how many have import categories hidden, etc., etc. So we can go across the screen here and identify whether or not it's your company template that isn't performing as it should do, and therefore identifying opportunities to improve the company template. Or you can drill down and understand, is it individuals that are going in and potentially hiding things because they possibly haven't been trained how to use the company template. Or, particularly from an architectural perspective, the need to have potentially MEP and structural analytical categories turned on could have huge detrimental effect, and just to not have them on in your template could save a lot of time in terms of that downtime of regenerating all of this analytical content when it doesn't actually need to be on there. So again, we're doing this for looking at the top 20 projects for view activity, the top 20 files for view activity, and then we can look at two other key statistics here around what are the views with the highest amount of hidden instances in them, and by user, what is the average or median number of views that user has open during any given period of time. So Autodesk best practice is to minimize the amount of open views you have. So a very quick opportunity here from a training perspective is to come in and look at who are your team members that have the most frequent number of, or the highest number of views open at any point. And again, we can do this across all of the projects, or we can drill down and filter by a project that you're interested in to be able to do that exercise within if you're the BIM manager on that project. Okay, so the other thing with views is that we can look at which views are created that are not on sheets and which users are constantly opening views that are not on sheets. So again, from a project perspective, you can look at cleaning up unwanted views. And from a training perspective, you can look at, are there users that consistently create views and don't clean them up. Largest families on projects. This is a really easy win. So this dashboard here highlights when any family has been loaded into the project over a certain threshold. We set the threshold at 3 megabytes, which is pretty reasonable for ADG and the content that we have. But if we look at some of the examples that we have with Bimbeats for other clients, you can imagine the detrimental effect of bringing in families that are this size, and then the downtime that's going to increase on your synchronization and opening. So we can do this again by project and identify which content is being brought in by project, and also the location that it's been brought in from. So if you have Unify or Kinship or Avail as your platform for your approved content, and it's not being loaded in from that location, you can identify who's loading it in and where they're loading it in from, and how frequently each user is bringing in content that is of excess of that threshold. And again, you can drill down across all projects or filter by a particular project that you're interested in. Warning counts, similar thing. We can look across all projects and find out what are the most frequent warnings across all of your projects to be able to identify what are the ones that you want to take action on, or the ones that you want to train people on that are most frequent within your company. And you can also set a severity level to those warnings, and that can be as whatever is important to your business. So we have a CSV file with a list of every single warning, and we go in there and we can set the ones that are important to us so that we only deal with the ones that we feel are having the most detrimental impact. And the way that we do that is that we say that anything that's to do with geometry or a calculation are the ones that affect the opening and syncing and performance of the file. So they're the ones that we focus on. But if your BIM management plan says that you can't have duplicate marks or something else, you can set that as being a high priority to you. Now, with the warnings dashboard, because we're looking at this on this particular dashboard over time, we can identify opportunities to come and intervene earlier when there is a large jump in warning. So on this particular project, we could have come in here and been notified by Bimbeats that there was a jump in the warning here to be able to come in and clean that up. Now, what happened on this particular project was there was obviously a jump here, and that went for a period of time before it was actually cleaned up here. Now, if we'd have intervened earlier by setting an alert in Bimbeats to say when it gets over a certain number of warnings that we can come in and identify that as and when it happened, this particular project could have saved whatever detrimental effect there is of having those additional warnings over that period of time. And again, we can break this down by project and users. So if we look at that from a user experience perspective, we're going to go in, we're going to drill down to a file that we're particularly interested in, and now we'll navigate through that process of each of those dashboards that I've just shown you. So we've selected the file, and now we're looking at Compact on Sync. We'll move to a different file and look at the views and an audit of the views. And we'll do the same thing by looking at the views on sheets or not on sheets. And now we're doing it at project level. So again, if you're the BIM manager, this is part of your kind of regular audit process of coming in here and making sure these things are cleaned up. And similarly with the families and the size of the families. And then lastly, the warnings. So the other thing that we can do once we're in this key metrics traffic light dashboard is identify potential metrics that we're keen to understand a little bit more about and look at what has happened with those metrics over time. So look at how they've trended. So if we pick this example here, we're picking this file, it's filled regions, it's a large number that's pretty unacceptable. But what we can do is we can then drill down and we can look at any one of those that are trending over time. Because Bimbeats and Elastic is a timestamp, is time-stamped, every time someone opens a file or synchronizes a file, these metrics are automatically updated, but you've got a history of what they were at any time. So if we drill down and look at that, we can navigate from this screen here into how that metric has trended over time. Now, what we're looking at here is the last 90 days of those filled regions. So it hasn't actually increased all that much over those last 90 days. And these are the people that were working on that project during that 90-day period. But because it's time-based, we can come in and we can say, well, okay, obviously this wasn't where the problem was, or when it increased. So we can increase this from 90 days to a longer period of time to understand when that jumped up or if there were peaks and troughs. So now if we change that from 90 days to a year, we can see that back here is when the intervention should have occurred. And again, we can set alerts in here to say if the field region count gets over a certain amount, that we're instantly notified that that thing has happened. So therefore, we could have intervened back here. So what we can do after moving from the trending metric is to be able to say, well, okay, now we've identified that there was a sharp increase in field regions. We can drill down into that period and look at the individuals and which individuals were creating field regions on that project. So we can move from here to the individual to say, okay, now I understand that this particular user created that many field regions over that period of time, and this is when they did it. So now it comes back to moving from the project metrics and improving the project to improving the competency of the people that are working on the projects and understanding training opportunities to obviously increase the competency of the people working on those projects. So again, if we look at that from the user experience perspective within Bimbeats, we've drilled down to that particular file. We're now going to say that we want to look at the field regions over time. We come in 90 days isn't long enough, so we'll extend that to a year. We'll update to a year, and then we can drill down over a particular period, and that will reduce the amount of people that are working on that project. And then from there, we can go to that annotation screen that will show what the user has done over that period of time with regard to annotation, and field regions is obviously one of the annotation features. So all of the user metrics around which commands are being activated is being processed by the journal file. So we're grabbing that journal file, we're doing some funky things with it so that it's structured in a very standard way, and then that is sent to Elastic so that we can query the actions being carried out by a user at any given period. Link load times. This one's really interesting in terms of we capture how long it takes to open Revit files and how long it takes to sync Revit files, but we also understand the effect of all of the links within the model in terms of the additional time it takes to load in the links. So an example that we had at ADG a couple of months ago was we found a large DWG that was, I think, 15 megabytes that just hadn't been cleaned up. And then we went through, opened up the DWG, cleaned and purged that file, and it significantly reduced the amount of time it took for that file to open because it wasn't the actual host file that was the problem, it was the link file attached to it. And that link file includes Revit, IFC, DWGs, all of the links. So within here, you can understand at a project level with your host file, how much time it's taken to open the links on that project over any given period of time, and whether or not they've succeeded or failed. So the succeeded or failed is particularly useful if people are loading in links from their local drive or from their network drive if it's a BIM 360 project and they should all be on BIM 360. So the way that we can look at that in more detail is break that down to cloud-hosted links. So understanding where it's located, so we know whether or not it's in Autodesk Docs, so ACC, or whether it's on BIM 360, and then where the link file path is coming from and how long it's taking, and then whether or not it's succeeded or failed. So again, identifying where these failing links are occurring, fixing them up means obviously it's reducing that time across all of the project, not just one individual. And similarly for internal links, this one's particularly useful where people are loading in links from their C drive that are only ever going to work for that individual and not the entire project team. And again, Conrad has got an article on his blog around the cost of doing this across an entire organization when it's not managed properly. Okay, so that covers pretty much everything that we capture within the projects space. We do a much deeper dive into the Revit families. So once you've identified those large families, we can then pull out a lot more data around the geometry within those families, how many sketch lines are in those families, and try and understand how you can clean them up and reduce the file size. And we've started producing a lot of dashboards around groups, unused groups, groups used once, groups with excluded instances. But we don't really have time to go through those ones today. Okay, so moving away from projects, a lot of the metrics that we capture there have been captured by others using Dynamo scripts and other methods. But I think one of the things that sets Bimbeats apart is this opportunity for competency profiling and upskilling people. And also something that I never really thought about until we hit COVID, and that is the wellness angle. So when we all went into lockdown, obviously we all had to work from home, and it wasn't as obvious the hours that people were putting in when they were at home. And when I say the hours that people were putting in, I don't mean that they weren't doing their contracted hours. It was around people working excessively long hours without anyone being aware of it, and potential burnout. So the very first dashboard that we're going to look at, and we'll go across again, similar to what we did on projects, we'll go through each of these. But the very first dashboard that we have here is looking at every individual across the entire organization and breaking this down into hour blocks so that we can quickly identify who's working consistently long hours or who's working over the weekend. So this is ADG, and this was, I think, maybe 6 months ago, because I used this same slide in the presentation at BILT. But in this example, we identified this individual, and we were like, okay, this is not good to see this amount of hours being spent on during one day and coming back on the weekend, and then it appeared to come and repeat itself a little bit early the following week. So what we have at ADG is we get this report automated to HR every week. They audit it and they check to see if there's any opportunities to talk to project managers on these projects just to identify how's the project going. So it's all about trying to understand how we can identify ways to reduce this burnout and reduce these long hours. Now, again, from a competency point of view, once we've identified someone that's working excessively long hours, we can then look to see how we can help them by drilling down to any individual and looking at the tasks that they were carrying out during that period. So a great example that we had at ADG was a recognition that a lot of people were working long hours that were doing reinforcement detailing. So we identified that they were common tasks that were being carried out, and we tried to automate as many of those tasks as we could. And then now buttons within our toolbar within Revit, so that a lot of the manual tasks that were being carried out have now been automated. Like we obviously haven't got everything, but we have been able to identify some key things that are repeat across the entire business that we've been able to automate to try and reduce that burden on the individuals where we can automate those processes. So again, if we look at that, if we're in Bimbeats, we click on the individual, we can filter by that individual to look at the breakdown of time, and then we can move to, well, what actions were carried out by that individual. Now, because this is listing every action that has been carried out, you can filter this or set that dashboard up so that you're only looking for certain things. So if you have automated a process and you know that people are still carrying out, or you're wanting to know if people are still carrying out the manual way of doing that, you can set it up to whichever manual actions are the commands so that it only picks that up so you can identify the people who might need some additional training. But from an HR point of view, this is really useful to understand, is it the same person? Is it the same project? Is it the same project manager? To try and find out the root cause of why these people are working excessively long hours. And again, just to reiterate, this is not about checking up on people to see if they've done their contracted time. It's all about well-being and trying to reduce the amount of hours that are being worked. So because we're capturing what's happening in the journal file, we're able to pull out what we consider best practices to identify who are the power users and who are the people that can train the people who may not be aware of some of these best practices. So these are the ones that we use at ADG, and these do come out of the box with Bimbeats. But it's who's regularly using keyboard shortcuts. We know that using keyboard shortcuts is far more efficient than using the ribbon. Who's closing those inactive views? So going back to that dashboard around who's got the most median views open at any time. These are the people that are regularly closing inactive views. So we know that this is good. Purge unused, turning the section box on, setting the view detail to coarse, etc., etc. But what's really useful with this, and the way that we've used this at ADG, is we run regular training sessions on best practice, and we can then use this over time to look at, has that improved? So once we've done the training, has the use of keyboard shortcuts increased? Has the use of closing inactive views increased, so that we can check to see how effective that training was, and then identify if new people come into the business and we identify those people that are not doing these things, then we know that we need to run the training with those individuals. So in here, we can see that keyboard shortcuts obviously is dominating this, this particular visualization. So it's very easy within Bimbeats to come in and just filter out any one of these commands, so you can drill down and look a bit in more detail at some of the others. So this is looking at all of them, and then I've filtered out the keyboard shortcuts so we can see some of these other commands, and you can just come in here and filter these as you will. And then again, drilling down over any time period if you want to understand a little bit more about a different time period. So here is exactly that. So this could be that you came in here and you did a training session on closing inactive views, and then the following week showed a spike of, okay, now people are starting to do that more often because we've done the training session and there's evidence that it's working. But hey, it dropped off again a couple of weeks later. So, you know, do we come back in there and redo that training? So here's the little user experience for doing that. So we come in, we filter. And now we're drilling down into closing inactive views only over any given period of time, and the team members and the frequency that the team members are doing that. The best practice training quick wins. So on here, this on the left-hand side is going into which team members always open every single work set when they open the model. Now, if you're opening every single work set when you open the entire model, you're obviously opening all of your links as well. Now, I would argue that you probably don't want to do that every single time you open the model, and it's probably more a training opportunity where these users don't understand the detrimental effect of only opening selected work sets rather than opening all of the work sets. So this is saying that it's always 100%. All of those work sets are always being opened. This is recording the time between syncs. So I think this top number says 2.2 days. Now, what's interesting with this is that this team member could be someone that doesn't frequently use Revit, but they've gone in on a Monday, done a couple of things, and then come back on a Wednesday and try to sync their changes. So whilst they may not have made many changes to that model, because they're obviously pulling back all of the changes that the rest of the team have made, this is a high chance that that file will crash or corrupt because of the fact that this timer sync is, or the time between saves is so large. Then we've got this on average, again, like how many median views are open. And then because you can drill down by team member, the rest of this dashboard would update. So you can see who's performing best practice and their average opening time, and compare that, and synchronization time, and compare that with another user who is following the best practice. Okay, keyboard shortcuts. So we've gone through that one. BIM Manager watch its. So on the flip side to the best practice, we can obviously start looking at some of the things that we don't like to see on a regular basis. And these are the ones that, for me, I like to understand who's overriding elements, who's importing CAD, who's exploding CAD. So these commands, again, this is all about training opportunities, but identifying who are the people that are doing these things so that we can advise them and show them a better way of doing this, importing and exploding CAD as an example. And then we can filter that out for probably one of the worst offenders of turning temporary hidden elements and making them permanent. And again, drilling down and understanding, you know, how frequently this is happening across which users. We have the selected commands traffic light dashboard, which is pretty similar to the watch its. But this is again using the color coding. So we use this annual reviews just to understand, you know, if this is all green, then that's considered a very competent user. If it's all red, it looks like that's an opportunity to train that user in some of the techniques to reduce some of these bad practices. And again, this you do this across the entire business and look at people that you might want to help out or at a appraisal level that you can actually drill down and use this within an appraisal to understand those competencies. So the advanced commands, on the flip side to the select commands, we have a dashboard that is all of the things that I would consider only a competent or highly competent user that I would like them to be performing. Or if you see someone who is of lower competency coming in here, again, it's a watch it to say they probably need some training on these things because of the detrimental effect of doing some of these things. So if we drill down into this in a bit more detail, we can look specifically at who is changing the coordinates, who's publishing coordinates, who's resetting coordinates, acquiring coordinates. And in the hands of a competent user, obviously this is exactly what those commands should be used for, but there's definitely opportunity here where I've seen that these commands have been used without an understanding of what those commands are actually doing. So here we can come in and we can look at setting project coordinates, I think it is, identify who is the person or the people within your business that are doing that most frequently. So if they are doing it frequently across multiple projects, they're likely to be the highly competent users, and using these people to transfer that knowledge on the job to people who don't understand necessarily how to do those things. Well, looks like that slide has corrupted. Are you seeing a blank white screen on that one?
Yeah, it's white, Matt.
Yeah, okay, that's a shame. I can see it in the preview, but anyway, I'll move along. Essentially, this slide was just explaining that Nettleton Tribe architects are hooking into the API within Bimbeats and pulling the data down so that when they do their resource planning on a Monday with the project leaders, they have an accurate representation of the competency of each of the people that are available to work on the project so that they can pair a novice with an expert and then put them onto a job so that that knowledge is transferred. And they have a Grasshopper script that pulls in the competency profiles, and the heads of the little people within Grasshopper get bigger and smaller depending on their competency, which is a pretty cool way of visualizing that. Okay, so we've covered pretty much the main things that we capture for people. And again, it's all around upskilling individuals and providing on-the-job opportunities to train people, identifying who are the most competent users with those that probably need a little bit of help, extra help. We do pull a lot more user data and the task dialogues. So every time a task dialog box pops up, there's a lot of useful information around that in terms of errors and failures and other useful information that you can share and learn from across the entire organization. Okay, productivity. So we've now done people, projects, people, and productivity. Now, this is the one that is, most critical to the business operations at ADG. So understanding when we don't adhere to best practice or quantifying the cost to our business of not doing these things. So we're going to run through a number of these, and I think some of these will be possibly quite surprising and alarming in terms of the amount of time that is wasted through not using best practice and through just using Revit and just having to kind of put up with the speed that Revit works at. So I pulled this visualization down just before I jumped into this presentation. So what this is saying, this is what we call the waiting time overview. So I've pulled this for the last 7 days within ADG, and you can see that there's been around 24 hours of time that has just been spent waiting for files to open, waiting for files to sync, waiting for views to open, and waiting for sheets to open. Now, that's across 35 people within our business. And if we say that's $200 an hour, that's $5,000 a week in waiting for Revit to do things. Now, I'm not suggesting we can eliminate that number completely, but at $200 an hour, which is a pretty reasonable billable rate, that's a lot of money that is wasted in just sitting, waiting around for Revit to respond. So a little bit later on, I'll go into how we can quantify improving this and what we can do to reduce this time. But before we do that, I just want to talk a little bit about the difference between BIM 360 and the network. And unfortunately, I've got some bad news for anyone that's in New Zealand or this part of the world, Australia and New Zealand. Unfortunately, you guys suffer slightly more than we do here in Australia. But what this is showing is a comparison between the time it takes to open files on your network compared to opening files on BIM 360, and the same with synchronization. And then it's broken down into small files, medium files, large files, extra large files, and then obese files. So I've kind of said 0 to 250 megabytes, 250 megabytes to 500, 500 to 750, 750 to a gig, and then anything that's bigger than a gig. So when we do that comparison with one company, we can see that internally within their network, it's 22 seconds to synchronize the file and 27 seconds on BIM 360. And this was over a short period of time, a few months ago, and I've now updated this slide, which we'll get to in a minute. But what we're doing here is being able to analyze by file size and location of that file the effect of opening time, whether you're on the network or BIM 360. So when we look at company B, it's got this same ratio, or there's a ratio that when you're doing things internally within your own network, it's much quicker than it is on BIM 360 across both of those companies. Now, the piece of work that I've done in the last couple of months is to look at this across multiple Bimbeats clients to see if there's a correlation between the time it's taking to do things, the time it takes to sync on BIM 360 compared to syncing on your internal network. Now, what's interesting here is that median sync time in Australia, New Zealand, and the US is all very similar when it's on your internal network. When it moves to BIM 360, in Australia, we're finding it's 2 times slower. In New Zealand, it's 2.5 times slower. And in the US, it's 1.5 times slower. So I don't know about you guys, but before we started using Bimbeats and we were using BIM 360, there was this suspicion that things were taking a little bit longer, but there was no way to prove how long it was taking. And what we think this comes down to is the fact that we don't have a BIM 360 server in New Zealand or Australia, and that we're having to reroute to go to the US. So the detrimental effect of that for us in Australia and New Zealand is massive. Now, obviously, there's a lot of other benefits of being in BIM 360, so this can't be used in isolation, but it's quite alarming, I think, to see that there is that significant difference in the performance hit that you get on synchronization time, particularly if you're in our regions. And I'd be keen to hear if that's what anecdotal evidence from you guys as to that's your experience. But in the studies that we've carried out across multiple organizations with the Bimbeats data, this is what we're finding, and it seems pretty consistent. So maybe after the presentation, it would be good to see if this is something that you guys are finding as well.
Actually, sorry, Matt, can I just interrupt you for a second? I'm just a bit, so we were talking about questions at the end, but I'm just a bit wary of time because it's already 10 to 7. Do you think you'll be able to sort of finish by 7 so we can allow a bit of time for questions at the end?
Yeah, absolutely.
Don't want to rush you.
No, I can. I was trying to work out what I could cull from the presentation, but let me see how we go, and I'll be conscious of trying to just wrap it up in the next 10 minutes.
Awesome, thank you.
All right, thanks, Mon. Okay, so if we look at organizational analysis, I think this one's probably really useful to understand what we're trying to do here. So within ADG, we were trying to understand where we were spending our time. Was it on GA plans? Was it doing detailing? Where were we spending our time to identify where are the opportunities for automation? So, and I'm going to try and skip through some of these, but what we ended up doing was looking at the amount of time that we spent doing reinforcement and post-tensioning was 44% of our time in March. So we then went and automated these processes to then come back into Bimbeats 6 months later to see if the effect of those automations had reduced the amount of time that we were doing post-tensioning and reinforcement. And it had, obviously, because we'd gone in and automated a lot of those tasks that were being carried out, which meant we could spend more time on coordination and the things that really mattered rather than the manual tasks. So this one, yeah, so similarly, we were using the information around how much time was spent within each view and looking at how much time was spent in any view that had the word typical in there. So we could identify which users were recreating typical details across multiple projects to pull this into a central file. So we now have a central file where all of our typical details live, and everybody knows to go in there, and that if we need to update them, they all are updated in the typical details file rather than in all of these individual files. Okay, I'm going to skip through some of these, but jump back to this because this explains around how important opening and synchronization times are and what you can do about it. And basically it comes down to file size. So this is another organization that we studied, which had 250 Revit users. And over the course of a year, 9,000 hours were spent opening, syncing, opening views and opening sheets. Now, when we plotted the time it takes to open a file across 100,000 events, depending on the file size, there's a clear correlation, obviously, that the bigger the file size, the longer it takes to open. And similarly with synchronization. Now, what that meant was that if you reduce your file size by 1%, it reduces your opening time by 1%. And if you reduce your file size by 1%, your synchronization time comes down by 0.8%. Now, if you do that across your entire business over the course of a year, and you can say that you want to get a 10% reduction in your file size on average across all of your projects, this is the potential for the amount of billable time that you can save. So it's significant to go in and adhere to the best practice because you can see just how much time it saves by reducing those file sizes. Just looking selectively at what we want to cover here, Mon. Jumping into Dynamo. So with scripts in Dynamo, we can extract all of the details around scripts, who's running which scripts, how frequently they're failing, how long they take to run, which scripts are being run in Dynamo, which scripts are being run in Dynamo Player. So the philosophy that we've had at ADG was that we call it kind of prototype to product. So we develop our scripts in Dynamo as the prototype. We then move it into Dynamo Player to widen the use across the business. And then if it gets the uptake in Dynamo Player, we're now building everything as a C# plugin within the Revit ribbon because by far it's the execution stability is far easier. And we don't have to manage the packages or be as conscious of managing the Dynamo packages. Now, if you've got Orchestra, that's great because you don't have to worry about that because it's a great tool that helps you do that. But we don't have that. So we've taken the route of Dynamo Player, and then pushing it into the ribbon as a button. So we're analyzing all of the Dynamo packages and the use of which custom packages are being used, which nodes are being used within each custom package. So again, from a training point of view, if you want to focus on training your people on the nodes that are important based on the scripts that are already built or have been built within your business, then you can do that. So there's a full analysis of computational design tools. And then lastly, so these are our add-ins and our add-in use. I think this was the last 3 months. So this is all of the add-ins that we have at ADG, and then we can break that down into understanding which of our tools are being used by which users. So again, here, this was a really good, or Bimbeats was able to pull out exactly how many people are using the tools that we're building, how frequently they're being run, so that because we've invested in a software developer in-house, we're able to justify the return on investment of building those tools because we can work out how long it took to do these tasks before they were automated within the ribbon, and then how frequently they're being run. So we've got a really clear ROI on those tools. License use across all products, because we capture what the computer's doing, we know exactly what exe files are running on everyone's machines. so we can capture the use of any tool and the frequency at which it's used and the number of people that are using it. So we've used this across all of our engineering applications so that we can keep a close eye on which users are using which applications and monitor our license usage so that we know whether or not we need to increase our licenses or reduce our licenses based on how they're actually being used within the business. Memory utilization and hard drive utilization, we've got a constant monitor on here. Every one of these red dots is when the memory utilization goes above 80% on a particular machine. So these are two key reasons why we find Revit fails, either not enough memory on the machine or the hard drive capacity has exceeded or has gotten to a point where it can't bring down the files from BIM 360 in the collaboration cache folder. And we can set up instant alerts for this. So I kind of spoke about this a little bit earlier on, but you can set up within Bimbeats that you just want this thing to send a Teams message or a Slack message or any other kind of webhook that when that threshold has been met on that computer, send a message to IT to say that that thing has happened as and when it's happened so that they can intervene. And you can do this across any of the, anything within Revit as an example. So if you're going to go in and import a CAD file, you can set up an instant alert that would ping a Teams channel to tell you that that action is being carried out. And these are the out-the-box rules, instant alerts that we have, but you've got full flexibility to develop whichever ones are important to you. Crash metrics, this is probably the one that the IT team like the most because every time Revit crashes that is an unrecoverable error or a fatal error, we know who it's affected, how frequently they've had that error, and then we can dive into their journal file to understand what they were doing prior to the crash so that we can pull together pretty much every reason for that Revit crash. We know how long the Revit had been open for. We know how long the machine had been open for. We knew when the user last synced, and we know how many sessions of Revit were running at the time. So everything that potentially could contribute to that crash is being captured as well. So that covers, well, I've obviously had to skip some of these, but that covers most of the productivity dashboards that we have. And we also have dashboards for Bluebeam and Enscape to understand how Bluebeam and Enscape are being used. So very quickly wrapping up, some key takeaways. We originally just had a heap of dashboards without any journey of going through and understanding the value of where do we start with this? Where do we learn? Where are the key things that we need to come in to intervene with? It was just overwhelming, the amount of data, and it's probably overwhelming to see it, even though it is completely structured now because of the range of data that we capture. The user experience is incredibly important. So again, we provided everybody with these dashboards, but didn't provide them with the link of how to navigate between them to tell those stories and get the insights out. And it doesn't just stop by making an intervention and not continuously improving on it. So the trending metrics and understanding the continuous improvement is really important. And then this last one, just focus on the things that have best bang for buck, because there are so many insights that Bimbeats and these types of tools pull out. It's focusing on those things that are really important to the business. And I think through our work with all of the organizations that we've worked with in the past, it really comes down to file size and reducing the file size through all of those best practice. And when you bring your file size down, you're significantly reducing your opening time and your sync time and the stability of the files. So that was a very quick whistle-stop tour. Apologies for the speed, and that was a lot to take in. But yeah, happy to answer any questions you guys have.
Thanks, Matt. Been gone on 7 o'clock. Yeah, start with Auckland. Anybody got any questions? Yeah.
Breaking the ice here. Matt, thank you very much for your presentation. Very, very good. Lots of data, lots of good insights, especially for someone like me, passionate about data and, performance and somehow helping out people around. So knowing, where we need to work is fundamental. And like you said, is also important to have a strategy. I have two quick questions. One is technical and one is non-technical. The first one is, Do you know the impact in terms of time of these logging activities? Because I think that, you know, capturing all this data and so on maybe has an impact in time. And the second question, the non-technical one, is around, let's say, the reaction or the feeling of users if they feel like spied, or, you know, somehow it's like, you know, do they feel the pressure of being monitored this way? Do they know it? Do they know the extent of data that they somehow submit every time they do something? And what was basically the reaction of the team? Thank you.
Yeah, two very good questions, and questions that we get regularly. So the first one, I've just navigated to this slide to show you that we've got these series of dashboards which are called Bimbeats Info, and in here we have this error debug. So in there, that basically records how long it's taking us to capture all of the data. So that if somebody does say, oh, since installing Bimbeats on my machine, I feel that Revit has slowed down, we capture how long it takes for us to capture that data. Now, we've been around for about 3 years, and we've had 2 examples where we've had to go in there and intervene, and they were on one was a 1.4 gigabyte file where the file was just so large that we were impacting the open time, I think, by 1.5 seconds, because it was capturing all of that data on open. So we were having, and we consider 1.5 seconds obviously impacting the file, but that file was taking, you know, in excess of 10, 15 minutes to open. So it was 1.5 seconds on 10 minutes, but it basically captures everything without the user knowing anything about it, unless it's an extreme circumstance where there is a file that is, you know, that large. So in terms of the downtime and the time it takes to log it, it's you just wouldn't notice it on a normal project at all. Second question around the users and their reaction. I've seen 2 different reactions depending on how it's been deployed, what the message is around the deployment, what the message is from people and culture within a business, and reinforcing the message that it's there to help the user, not that it's there to spy on the user. And where that hasn't been communicated clearly, then yes, there are individuals that feel that that's what's happening. So it is very, very important that you've got HR and people and cultures buy-in, and that communication is very clear that that's what the intent of the tool is. And in all honesty, I have one example of where this tool has been used for pulling someone up who, and in fairness, I don't think this is a bad thing, that they were working from home 5 days a week, booking 40 hours to a job, and Bimbeats showed that they were working on private work. Now, in that particular instance, I don't think it's a bad thing that Bimbeats picked that up, but it's definitely not being used, and the intent of it is not to use it to try and identify people who are not doing the right thing. It was used in that case because there was a suspicion that the work wasn't being completed within the time frame, and it was just used to say, well, we can see that you weren't working on that project. But it's really all about the opportunity to improve the competency and reduce the amount of hours people are working.
Thanks, Matt. I also have a question. Are these dashboards available to anyone that's got Bimbeats, or do they have to build them up from scratch themselves? Because like you said, the data without the dashboards is quite overwhelming.
Yeah, they are now all fully available and in the latest release of Bimbeats. So what you've seen on the screen here, yes, and not all of what I've shown you is obviously from ADG, but yes, they're fully available out the box. And Anton and Jake, who are there, who have just jumped into these dashboards, so they can talk about, you know, how easy it is to customize what the out the box solution is, and navigate their way through. I think we've had 3 or 4 sessions with those guys, an hour each time, and I think that they've got enough to go off now by themselves and customize what they want to customize. But I'll let them see if that is the case in reality. But I think once you've had 2 or 3 sessions of learning how the data is being captured, then you're good to go.
Anton, do you want to comment on that?
There's not really much more to add. Yeah, they are very, very useful dashboards.
Anyone? Yeah.
Thanks, Matt. Did you do a comparison with Autodesk Construction Cloud? You did it with BIM 360 to the server. Did you also do it with ACC?
It's an interesting question, actually, because we were asked by a customer who thought that it had gotten worse over the last 6 months. So we actually did the study and broke it down into 3-month chunks of the last 3 months, the 3 months prior to that, 3 months prior to that, and 3 months prior to that. And it looked like when we did that study that it had gotten worse. Now, that could be, and thanks for pointing it out, I didn't look to see whether or not that was because more and more projects were migrating from BIM 360 to ACC, but that could be one of the reasons why that it had appeared to have gotten worse in recent months because of the transition from BIM 360 to ACC. But I can't confirm, but it did look like there was a correlation between it getting worse than what it was a year ago.
I mean, I think just for me, just a quick comment, Matt, about the sync times or opening times and the correlation with the file size. While I kind of agree with Dave, I also at the same time I think there's every factor that contributes to sync time and opening time. But we found, so I work for JetMix and I'm working on a airport project, and it's quite large. There's about 20 people working on in the same Revit model, and we use the data from Bimbeats to have a look at the opening time and sync times, and that kind of helped us come up with a strategy to try and reduce that. And it was a mixture of trying to reduce file size, but also a lot of educating the team on how to open the file, opening with all the work sets closed, how to synchronize, because there's a team of 20 people and people can't synchronize at the same time. So yeah, like this queue on Teams, and like you need to add your name to the queue, and sometimes you have to wait 2 hours before you can sync because the queue is so long. But trying to teach them that like while you're waiting to synchronize, you can reload the latest, so then your sync times will be shorted because you've already reloaded the latest. So it's been great to have the data to then start the conversation and try and educate the team. And then we're in the process of now on keeping an eye on the data and see if we've actually taken on board what we told them to do and how to improve things. Yeah.
Yeah, and that I think you're not alone there. We've had a number of customers who are working on large projects with a large number of people, and they're going through the exact same exercise of trying to work out, not getting to Friday afternoon where 20 people all need to sync and go home.
Yeah, or worse, we just shut the laptop without synchronizing them and reopening it at all.
Yeah, and I open it again on Monday.
Any questions from Wellington?
No, we're all good here.
No, cool. Well, thanks, Matt. Thank you so much for the presentation. Before we finish, I think, Matt, if you want, you can, I might just show you again, but if you want to leave, I just wanted to have a quick chat with the people that are here, maybe about the next presentation or event that we're going to have in a couple of months. So I don't know, Matt, if you want to stay for that.
I'll just, I'll leave you to it.
Yeah.
But yeah, thanks for the opportunity to come and chat to you guys about Bimbeats. And yeah, you can obviously continue the conversation there because you do have Monica and Anton and Jake who are using it. So, and if you want a demo, reach out. But I'm not here to sell it anymore because I'm working at ADG.
Awesome. Thanks, Matt.
All right. Thanks, guys. Appreciate your time.
Cheers. But yeah, no, I wanted to just have a quick chat about the next event because I was talking with Maria and Amedeo. Sorry, Anton, we haven't talked to you about this one yet, but I was thinking a good topic for the next event could be AI, because I know it's quite a hot topic at the moment. I know that there are a couple of people at JetMix that are playing around with it. Maria is quite knowledgeable about it. And we were wondering if you guys would be interested more than in a presentation, but maybe just an open discussion about how we can use AI in the construction industry, maybe some examples of what people have been playing around with. I'm pretty sure half of you already played around with ChatGPT somehow. So I'm not going to put anyone on the spot right now, but if it's something that you'd be interested, maybe also if it's something that you'd like to be a part of and maybe showcase something that you've been working on or just bounce some ideas, yeah, come and talk to us, to me or Amedeo or Michael or Anton in Wellington. Yeah, and then we can see if we can organize something. But I think, yeah, that's a very hot topic at the moment, and I'm quite keen to hear what everybody is doing.